So without further ado, I'd like to ask our esteemed panelists to attend the stage. Let's get into some serious conversation about which enterprise leaders will succeed and who's going to fail as we tackle this global, assault on everything we knew as stable. Maybe Manish from Accenture, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I think this is the most often debated question, right? And I think the key thing which I will say on this is that leaders who will embrace change, who will focus on changing the way the work gets done, I think that will be the focus. The leaders who will focus on data as a primary thing, because you can't have all the stuff that Phil talked about if you don't have the basic stuff on the data really sorted. But embracing change, changing the way we do work, data at the core, digital core at the center of everything we do, that is the key.
CP, do you agree with that? How's the role of leadership changed much, in your opinion? Is it going to keep changing?
When I was growing up, I remember my father telling me, work hard like an ant, be strong like a tiger, and be friendly like an elephant, where a child can also go to an elephant and have the right attitude. And somewhere, I think, if I go back to my father's lessons, which he was trying to paint, to a child through the animal kingdom, I think the fundamentals have never changed. So whether it is medium term or long term, the role of leadership, I would only add to what my father used to say, have the vision of an eagle. I would further add that you lead in a formation like a geese. You communicate the way the dogs or the wolves communicate. So, and why am I bringing the animal kingdom out here to today's conversation is that nature has always taught us a few good things. And my personal belief is that leaders who have recognized, now whether it is Satya Nadella coming in and recognizing that the old method had to change, but it is really the old method. Satya, what he did was actually adopt himself. So again, uh, may not be the best comparison, but being a grandfather of a 2-year-old, I'm only reminding what my father taught me. So I'm back to animal kingdom.
Okay. Good stuff. Maybe Sandor, you're in the talent industry these days. What are you looking for leaders, and how do you think that role is shifting?
Well, I think the role of leadership as such hasn't changed much. I think how leadership is executed, if you will, has changed a lot. And we're all about talent at Randstad. So if you just look at the world of talent, talent is scarce, and that is not going to go away. The unemployment in all the major markets is at historical lows. So as companies, as leaders of organizations or businesses, we have to make sure we create an environment where talent can thrive. And that means you need to give talent to a certain extent, or to a great extent, or a greater extent than in the past, what they are looking for. I was on a panel the other day in Netherlands. We used to have a saying, for you, 10 others. In other words, Chetan, if you don't want to work for me, I can find 10 other people. That's no longer the case. So you almost have to start treat your employees as customers. You need to really look at what they are looking for. Now, what are people looking for these days? They're not just looking for a job and a payslip. Flexibility is something that post-COVID has risen to the top of the list. And that's not going to go away. So you need to be something. You need to create that environment where you can provide flexibility to provide people with the right work-life balance. Then it's of course about meaningful work. The purpose of the company, is that aligned with what your employees are looking for. And then last but not least, and in Randstad we call it equity, we want to be the most equitable talent company in the world, meaning do you create a work environment where people feel comfortable, where they don't have to leave anything by the door, where they can focus on work rather than on other things that are playing a role in their life. So really, you need to put yourselves in the shoes of your employees and make sure you create that right environment, because otherwise you can be the best leader in the world with the greatest vision, but your people are not going to follow you.
Excellent. Thanks, Adam. So, Tony, over at the end there, working in a large enterprise as a CPO, right? Do you feel that enterprises are adapting to this new world, or are we still clinging to the rules of the past?
We are definitely at the inflection point where I think it's what we're faced with today, which is very different than what we've looked in the past. You pointed out cybersecurity a moment ago. It's something that has always been prevalent. If anyone WannaCry or has to deal with the Lazarus Group or things like that, right? There's some real serious issues out there. But what we're looking at from a recessionary and post-pandemic world, we're now looking at where we work, how we work, and we're also looking at new employee groups that we've never actually. This is a different employee group today than it was 20 years ago. The old world of how we used to lead isn't the same any longer. So are they adapting to this, and how are they adapting to it? I think they're asking managers to learn how to lead more with their heart than they've ever had to lead with in the past. And in terms of rules of the past, being locked in our offices from 8 to 5 is a different piece of it. But when you combine that with cybersecurity rules, it's almost like the BPO age of 20 years ago when you'd lock all of your work in a room and no one could bring paper in or out, and you disabled hard drives. It's a very different world, and we're going to be facing that everywhere.
Excellent. And maybe Suzanne, from your perspective, that you run the Americas business at Wipro, do you feel we're at an inflection point, or are we clinging to the past too much?
I absolutely believe the comments around the leadership is critical, because you're only as good as the team that's behind you. And as we think about the type of talent we need, need to help them move forward in terms of the training that we provide them and give them a sense of purpose. I truly believe in this purpose-driven culture that, having someone just generate a piece of code, a bot can now do it. We just talked about that. Those are those types of skills that are most at risk, and most can be done by AI. So we need to really help our people adapt to those new technologies and have a purpose for what they're doing and feel a sense. And go back to the point also on flexibility. That's a huge reason and area that we need to make sure we adapt as a business to give that flexibility to our employees.
Thanks. Thank you, Suzanne. And, I think to build on that, Sander, I'd love to hear a bit more from you in your role running one of the world's largest talent organizations. What are the steps business leaders can take to attract and retain the best? And maybe a little bit about the flexibility of working remotely. How do we make flexibility equitable?
So at Randstad we talk about flexibility with intentionality, meaning we are here to do a job. That's number one. We're here to serve our clients. We're here to serve our talents. So that's number one. So if the work requires you to be in the office or in some physical place where you collaborate, then that is what you have to do. You cannot say, sorry, I have to leave the dog. And outside of that, we let the teams decide where and when they work, how they work, because that is where the flexibility comes in. So I think that's a good way. I've seen many companies, many of our clients are struggling to say, well, we want to be 4 days, we want to be 2 days, and or even 5 days. And at the end of the day, with those types of measures, everybody is frustrated because leadership in the companies is frustrated because the people don't show up. They simply don't. and employees are frustrated because they have the leadership tell them what to do. So finding that balance, which I think is different for every company and even different role by role, team by team, is really important.
Okay. Some data we were sharing from a big study we ran recently showed when we looked at what employers wanted to do versus their employees, you can see the employees on the right. The biggest difference was people wanting more empowerment to make decisions, and people were less focused about the missions and values of the company.
Yeah, well, and something interesting to add here is people are increasingly willing to decide to leave the company if what they are getting is not what they're looking for, whether it's around equity, whether it's around flexibility, whether it's about purpose and values. 50% of the people from our research say, well, we would be willing to leave the company even without having another job yet, because people have options. Because we are talking about a recessionary environment. I think we're sort of on the brink of recession, but unemployment here in the US is still at 3.5%. And when we all went to school, at least when I went to school, 5%, that was the perfect level of unemployment. So it's a different world out there.
It certainly is. Are we going through recession? Hands up. I'm as
well, there was a hurricane coming. Jamie Dimon said 3 quarters ago. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
So my base case scenario is, we're going to be sort of fooling around a little bit until, but it could be 2, 3, 4 quarters, I guess.
Yeah, a global shortage of talent maybe staving it off.
Yeah.
I want to make a comment. Most of us have, including the charts that you presented, talk about the global shortage of the talent. I start with a hypothesis that if there are 7 billion plus people, if almost in most countries that you visit, unemployment is one of the big issues, why is talent shortage an issue? You put in one of your charts, you need prompt engineers, and you don't have prompt engineers. Now, if you anticipate the need of a prompt engineer, and most of us had to set up our own universities, Tech Mahindra has its own university, every company has its own university. If you anticipate and if you go where the people is, if you take into account the new technologies, if you take into account the remote working, if you take into account online, offline learning, there is no talent shortage. It is just that we are not decisive, we do not anticipate, and we do not move.
Yeah. How many of your staff have already said, I want to become a prompt engineer?
Sorry, what are the questions?
How many of your staff want to become a prompt engineer?
Again, as I said, it's my job to educate what the trend is. Yeah. Trust me, I've gone back not only on the prompt engineering, I've actually taken them back to 30 years ago and said, start with the case tools. Because you can't become a prompt engineer if you do not understand the basics and you don't understand the case tools.
True. Absolutely true. So let's think about this. We're just talking about the current business environment and how's this impacting tech and innovation. What's getting backburnered, what moves to the forefront. I mean, Chetan, Dube, the founder and CEO of Amelia, very well-known, intuitive digital employee. I've had the pleasure of observing the development of that capability. What is happening now in terms of the speed of shift with tech and innovation, and what do you think is going to fade versus what is coming into play?
Well, I think we are in the midst of what we've been talking about, the digital Darwinistic curve. I remember 2015, Sander being in my offices and me asking him, what if digital employees were to become indistinguishable from human employees? And I asked Sander, what if it works as advertised? And Sander said, nothing works as advertised. So I think, but the time has come. We said that 2025 will happen. He was witness to it. And I said 2025, digital employees will become indistinguishable from human employees. And you're proof positive to that fact. The time is here. Now the question is, how do we face this trend, and how do we actually incrementalism? Will incrementalism cut it? If you subscribe to Phil's philosophy and the S curves, incrementalism in a period of digital Darwinism, where the inflection curve is much steeper than the curve that you're planning on growing, is not going to cut it. And so generative technologies, as Phil has pointed out, are an absolute quantum shift in the way you operate. It's been, and by the way, generative technologies are not that, oh my God, it just happened right now. Look, everybody that's been following it, and I've been doing this research for a couple of decades, you would look at, go back to the Elmo models, then go back to bidirectional, and here you've been there, go back to bidirectional models, BERT models. What were they? They were just, a few 345 million parameter models. What has happened is that 345 parameter model graduated into Turing MLS models and Microsoft about 10 to 17 billion models. And that graduated into GPT 3.5, 175 billion parameter model. 1 trillion parameter model. The hallucination and all these effects will diminish. You're going to find them to be indistinguishable from humans. The challenge is, they are providing you, it's the equivalent of what here you and I have talked about is Whisper Agent. They're providing you assistance. They're providing you a recipe for the cake. Can you have the cognitive capability to bake the cake? Can you raise generative to the power of cognitive? Can you take it from assist to resolution? And that's where the next big wave will be. And that's where you will see that being forefront of research. And what backburnered, I mean, I think obviously the metaverse and some of even the ESG initiatives have gotten backburnered because of the GPT wave currently. But sorry to bore you with the numbers and math. But I think it is very compelling as you see the exponential rise of the parameters in these models. You start to see the hallucination drop, and you start to see asymptotically approaching human levels of competence. And that's what you will see more pronounced in the next 18 months.
Can I ask a question? Chetan, in Mumbai, around 2015-16, you had made a statement that 70% of the current IT jobs will get automated, and it became an Economic Times in India headline.
That's right.
What is your forecast now? And between 2017, between 2017 and 2023, actually the market expanded. So the jobs did not get eliminated. What's your forecast for the next 5 years?
Well, let me ask.
Sorry, I'm doing your job.
Well, first, I'll ask you, Tech Mahindra. I submit that 70 to 70% automation is almost the floor of what you do. So it has happened. Ask me here, it has happened. Almost all incoming exceptions, you're not a competent enterprise if of the total incoming volume, 70% is not being automated. That is being done. Now, yes, you're right again, CP, that the volume has expanded. More and more has moved from ITSM to ESM, and everything has expanded, and everything is becoming IT-centric, as this curve also showed. The budgets are expanding. But this curve is shifting from just automation into, which was often a back office premise, to being front office, to being customer care, and to being equivalent to human beings. And so it's a much more pronounced change as opposed to a back office kind of thing, which people in the audience have perfected at this point. Here and others have led this revolution. I think that now it is becoming more would you, your autonomous enterprise, your generative enterprise, how would you blueprint your generative enterprise? Would you build it with humans? And how would you give the roles to humans? And how would you give the roles to the generative digital employees that you will have in your enterprise? And that's the leaders have to face that challenge of like what the roles, and the hiring has to be focused on the quality of employees that you get, as opposed to the quantity of employees. That's a big shift in that current philosophy.
You answer your question.
No, I mean, you know what's going through my mind, Chetan? You know, when I sit in a car, I know maps have got automated,
That's right.
but we still, you know, some parts, yeah, no, we have done the automation and you have driverless driving,
Yeah.
but maybe we are in that generative AI is bringing us more into the driverless
That's right.
driving.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I'm just using my visualizing. But remember, I told you Animal Kingdom.
There we go.
No, but let's say time and time technology. We have had the discussion. Technology is going to replace humans, but the history has also taught us there will be new jobs and new roles to be played, and the demands of us as a society, of us as consumer and as businesses are going up every time. So I'm not concerned about there will not be enough jobs. I'm more concerned with you, CP, and Chetan, is how are we going to ensure that the people who have to do the jobs are going to have the right skills?
Yeah.
That's
I
true.
think that is where the critical question is.
Yeah.
I think the first time when it was told that the jobs will disappear was not in 2015, it was 1851, 1871, right? So, I think the
And I was only
industry always,
reminding NASSCOM, Chetan did a keynote at NASSCOM in Mumbai, and I was reminding Chetan about that keynote.
That was just to scare you all a little bit.
You know, the point I keep remembering is that we just went through COVID where every business decided it needed and realized it needed to be digital. So we saw this massive boom. But now we're recognizing that the skills are going to need to change to support exactly what you said. Because the task to even write code, check code, contact center, frequently asked questions, all this can be done by a bot. This could be done through AI. And the AI learning at the enterprises that they support, those people, whether we call them people or those workers, are we going to become real? And then how do we have the talent that can teach it in the right way, remove the bias, and make sure that it's actually adding value to our clients and to the enterprises we support? So that's what I think needs to be the focus as we shift our focus on talent.
Yeah.
Actually, I think the biggest issue is that our labels of talent still talk to 10 years ago. We are looking for jobs which are composites of tasks which were similar to what they were 10 years ago. With all of the technology that's now available, those jobs need to be redefined because there are tasks in that jobs that are not needed, which then links to talent retention because nobody is stopping by and asking people, what makes you happy about the work that you do? We are trying to fit them into a box. And that's what the whole concept of, hey, flexibility is all about. So if we can recraft the jobs and build those with all of the available technology inserted in it, all the questions on how do we retrain people, how do we redefine skills, will then become much easier to answer.
It's almost like that big spike in spending we saw in IT was all tied to us pandemic time, implementing, as you said, all the technology we needed to automate all the work. Now what we're talking about is doing the work. It's not moving the work from widget to widget, it's doing the work. We can now capture every piece of data in an email. We can capture and combine it with all third-party types of data. We can do all that type of work. We've never really spent a lot of time focusing on how sales sells, how procurement procures, how marketing markets. And now the technology we're talking about today is that type of technology. It's not the work of moving widgets around the globe. And that because of that, when you see what's getting backburnered right now specifically is all that workflow, it's all done. It's all amortized. We're carrying it across in our depreciation and all of our all of our IT budgets right now. We don't need more of that tech. We're really asking the question, now we've got all this, what do we do with it?
So what do we do with what we've got? So Metaverse was the flavor of last year. And now it's all about generative AI. Are we on a constant hype cycle, or do we expect these innovative technologies to reach their promised heights? Maybe Manish, what do you think?
Hype is all about hope. You should always remember that, right? Why hype is created? Because we are all seeking for higher profits, higher productivity, higher, almost everything which is higher. I think some of the earlier technologies, they didn't probably have good underlying technology to kind of create the right adoption for this. We had the wave around automation. I see Mihir here sitting in his office. I don't know whether it was 10 years back. We're talking about RP and everything else. Having said this, I will say that the generative AI wave, what we are seeing, I think is real. Is probably not, I think all the other stuff that we had talked about, they never had the underlying technology. And even for the Gen AI stuff, we are seeing it already. I think and I think one of the, I don't know how many saw this, but Phil presented that slide, but that 30% and the now compressed transformation around that 30 to 70% more, I think is real. So this is probably more real than anything else that at least I have seen, just because of the underlying this thing. Now, when we talk about this, what is the one biggest hindrance towards this greater adoption, which people probably might not look at it seriously, but I think it'll come, is the quality of data. And I think the quality of data, we can create all the stuff, but if the quality of underlying data is not there, I think we will struggle even with Gen AI. But I think the organizations are realizing it. They're building the digital core. There is underlying stuff. And I think what Chetan was mentioning again, look at just the adoption that we are seeing. If you're creating your own private version, I think it is real and not anything like the previous ones.
Yeah, I would agree. It is real. And just building on what Chetan said earlier, just step back and think about what's possible. What's possible here is to deliver differentiated services personalized at the end point, which didn't exist before. Whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, and then it is about scale. So this is not about a lab experiment that's going to happen in a corner. It's accessible to all of us. So it drives your scalability. So it changes the equation from one to many to a many to many equation, which wasn't there before. And I agree with Manish, if the underlying data is not sorted, this will not scale. So if there is an emergency measure required right now, it is about underlying data, recognizing what data is needed, what decisions leaders need to make those decisions, what data is required, and how do you drive automation and better processes sitting underneath that data.
It's interesting because getting the sales pitches all the time from different suppliers about what works and what doesn't work. The comment around the data quality is so real, because if it's only 80% accurate, for those of you that run operations, you do not want to put the bad transaction through your systems, right? You're going to be wrong 20% of the time, right? And so this stuff is real because now what it's doing is it's presenting not just 10 or 20% of the bits of the data, it's now representing 80, 90% of it. It's the value of the human in the loop part that we haven't even spoken about yet that is really the point here. It's what we need to do as humans with what we're seeing and how we can do it better. And when we look at underwriting in our world, right? And how can we take all this data and improve underwriting decisions? If you're missing key bits of data, it can be crucial to making a bad decision on a risk.
Yeah.
So it's about how can we resist the lessons of, oops, we made a mistake, so now we need to put all these processes in to manually review all the data to make sure we get back to 99% quality. We need to find that balance. And as this data gets better, I think we'll get a little bit better as humans in the loop. being okay with errors.
When I think about Metaverse last year, there was close to $2 billion invested in Metaverse. And clients were still trying to figure out the right use case that had its place, learning and development, twinning, cloning, like conferences, things that seemed useful, but almost looking for that next use case to drive real value. And I think it's the combinatorial things, Metaverse and other things that will soon reach its value, and it may take some time, just like when we had cell phones. They used to do nothing but phone calls, but look what we can do with a cell phone now. From 1970 to now, it's absolutely incredible. But I think when you look at generative AI and what is happening today, it's already disruptive. I see it already. I saw it from my kids before we were talking about it. They were using it to write papers, and they were the human checking in and validating it. And it's already disrupted in schools, and now we're seeing it in the workplace. And the use cases are abundant, and they're great use cases. Yeah. They're game changing. So I say it's already disrupting, and it's how we make it valuable and useful, and making sure the data quality is good, because that will be the key to everything.
I think one point, Phil, before we leave this, because I don't want anybody to leave this here without, I think we talked about the data, which is great, but I think responsible AI, the compliance towards this is going to be massive. It's the first thing we did as an organization was around the compliance and what is responsible, Gen AI, because if you're going to create biases, wrongness, and inaccuracies, you're going to create havoc, right, on this. So you need to put those parameters right before you start going too bullish on this.
Yeah, I mean, little things like being able to cite sources of data is huge. Like, where is this stuff coming from? Because that was the thing. We had a meeting in our research teams thinking, oh my God, a small analyst can just pull some crap from anywhere and just, we think it's great work. I just look at the developments going into GPT-4, and there's a significant shift. Yeah. And that's the shift which, it's almost like an iPhone moment. So when Steve Jobs released the iPhone in 2007, and I suggest go on YouTube and watch his launch. He had the next 15 years mapped out on this phone. He knew how we're going to adopt it, and the speed of adoption and everything. I think we're at that point now where we can see this stuff happening. We can see the potential of this technology, and we can see stuff that's failed. Now, I don't think the metaverse failed. I just don't think anyone wanted to wear a bloody headset, honestly. If you've walked around the thing, bumping into every item in your living room, you're like, okay, that was fun, but I'm not doing that again. We are at an inflection point, and I think let's think about this. Does this create more opportunities than threats for enterprises? I mean, Suzanne, do you want to sort of elaborate a bit on what you said and think a bit more about, is this a real threat or is this an opportunity? I noticed in India, for example, I see less buzz about this in India than anywhere else, because some of these think, oh my God, you're going to frickin' start programming using this stuff? We're in trouble, but.
Yeah. So I look at everything as an opportunity. So you can say it's a threat. It's a threat to what? So the question is, how do we change how we work? And I do really think it goes back to talent and the people. The reality is standard processes, repetitive work, all of that was going down the path of being disrupted. And that will continue, and people need to rethink the type of skills they have and the roles they're going to play in an organization. You're not just going to have something generate code and throw it out the door. You would have a human. There needs to be controls and governance around quality. And also there's the human element that we need to make sure. And I think that's responsible, whether it's AI doing code checking or code development. And I think that's an important part of how we think about how this really moves forward, is the responsibility of organizations. And we're already putting out responsible uses in the organization, putting frameworks together to help clients think through, how does this get applied in your organization, and how do you use the right learning models and make sure it's adding value. So I think it really goes back to the talent and how we rethink how we work and the jobs we do. Because candidly, I think it creates a much more exciting opportunity for people than the kind of work that some people are doing that can be quite laborious and boring. So to me, it's an opportunity, but it's going to be a challenging one for leaders to navigate.
I think it creates an opportunity to link the work that we do with real outcomes, and it brings outcomes closer to the work that we do because it connects data, process, people, technology with the outcomes that the enterprise is trying to achieve, which is your client. So to me, that is a huge opportunity, which was distant before generative AI.
So I think what Chetan mentioned again, right? But doubling of the number of tokens from 3.5 to 4, number of parameters from 750 million to more than a trillion.
Yeah.
If you look at those two data points, so I know we're talking about 3.5 to 4. Phil, like I'm sure when you do this thing in 2 years' time, we'll be talking about GPT-10 and we will think that this is probably not sure what GPT-4 was all about and why the hype on GPT-4.
Right.
Because it will learn and it will get better. I think I'll repeat here again, right? The issue will be if you're going to use it in a reckless way without any responsibility, you are going to land large enterprises into trouble.
Yes.
And that is one, I want to remind again the caution around the compliance and the responsible AI part. Because if you're going to overcome that, then you probably will be a winner.
Yeah. I mean, Sander, how should leaders prepare their workforces for this in your...
Well, if I'm just looking at this chart, it says the generative enterprise AI driven. I fundamentally disagree with that because it will not be AI driven, it will be people, talent, skill driven because ultimately it's about what we do with the technology. And the one big concern, and there's maybe two big concerns around talent. A, we all grew up learning basic skills. Writing a paper, doing market research, whatever field you were in. Now, if AI is going to do all that, how are we going to train our young folks to learn those basic skills to be ultimately the judge of something that is an AI output? This is one big thing that's going through my mind, and I don't have the answer. It's not so clear. The other thing is, if you ask people who is responsible for your career, more than 50% of the people says it's my employer. And that's a big issue because people need to take charge of their own careers. They need to they need to take responsibility. And then for us as leaders in businesses, it's not just a matter of putting a catalog of all online learning somewhere, and we've done that, and we've found out people they go online, they say 350 courses on marketing. Okay, where am I going to start? People need help. They need to say, if you go, you're now here. If you take these or 2 or 3 courses or trainings, you can aspire to that role. They need to see those pathways, which is really important. And then these pathways are obviously changing in the world where AI is so important. But I don't think things will be AI driven. I think things will be leader and people and talent driven.
Yeah, nothing's more powerful when people introduce something to the enterprise. Like everyone wanted to buy Apple Macs and brought them into the enterprise, and eventually Microsoft gave up and said, okay, you can run our software on them.
Right.
So it's the same with this. If our kids are using ChatGPT and they're using it to run their lives, they're going to want to work with the thing, and it's going to bring it in that way. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think with just one comment on that, I agree with what Manish and Suzanne pointed out, that I think the leaders have to think about what the new enterprise would look like. And I think we have to assign the roles of humans, their human assets, to non-commoditized, creative parts of work. Take investment banking. You may think, do a classic valuation analysis. Okay, I want to be able to find P&L, balance sheet. I want to be able to read the cash flow. I want to compute discounted cash flow, and I want to compute the comparable company analysis. That's all I want to do. You go to GPT-4 and you type that in, you will see a narrative. Now imagine if you had a natural language compiler that could actually read that narrative and actually have a cognitive system on the back end that would actually do the discounted cash flow for you, that would actually compute that. You don't want to be a Goldman Sachs. You don't want to be a JP Morgan and say, I'm going to hire these horde of investment banker associates, which are always hired, that are going to be doing this classic thing. You want to be reapportioning them in non-commoditized areas where they can be an asset to the organization. The role of humans have to be rethought in this new world. When you will raise the power, when you will raise generative to the power of cognitive, you will be printing out digital employees. And we have to rethink the role of human employees where they can be an asset to make our organizations go further. And it's the responsibility of the leader to be able to do that, because this will come very quickly in the next 18 months. And CP and Sandra will hold me accountable to it. Because Phil has a tendency of bringing the big giants and putting me on the stage, and they beat up on me. So,
And we all love that.
and they all love doing that. But I think in the next 18 months, if I have the privilege of sitting next to these giants, then they will hold me accountable to the fact that, are we really looking at digital employees doing investment banking? And you will say, yeah, actually they are.
I guess
think,
the question.
Chetan.
Go ahead, CP. No, I was just going to say, you said digital employees. Does that make other employees more empowered? Because we just learned empowered employees is what retains, that people get excited about.
That's right.
Does this enable people to be, not just feel, more empowered? I say it does.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that could be the real game changer for us as we think about how we retain the best employees.
Yeah, but the question is, you put a machine gun in their hands, and what are they going to do with it?
Yeah.
No, but that's a real risk, I think. I think, bad stuff can happen. Let me put it like that.
Yeah, like for the last 20 years, it's been the global redistribution of workforce to different countries for low-cost labor, or they've been able to use ERP systems to do faster data and reporting than they've ever done before. Now we're talking about what are people going to do doing the work and how they're going to be doing it differently. How do you learn the work is going to change? It's not going to be through like online learning type of things. It won't be fast enough. Yeah, and that's going to be the big challenge I think we have, is that how do you learn how to do a job when none of the beginning jobs are available any longer? How do you step into a knowledge-based learning role when there's nowhere to learn? How do you start?
Right.
But
So Phil raised a point.
I'll challenge your statement a little bit. And I go back to 1851 comment that Manish made. At that point in time, if you were an artisan, you were like really valuable because there was machine not available to do anything that you could do.
Yeah.
You defined the work as being an artisan and then said, oh, what is this person going to do? But look at what has happened. So therefore, what the outcome of a job itself is going to change.
But I get your point. I can now use a 3D printer and make my art, right? But someone still has to design the art.
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
If I want, if I want to send you a piece of art and I can read what you really value, I can create multiple pieces of art in a minute. And you will then say, hey, I like this and I don't like that.
Yeah.
So that didn't exist.
You're 100% right in that way, because now we're looking at these computers actually making artwork, making videos, making movies. Because right now we're talking about output just being purely data and transactions. What if it was make a movie, please?
Yeah.
And it actually shot the movie for you live.
So Met recently ran a challenge to critically acclaim every piece of art that existed in the museum. And what they came back with is it was able to identify pieces that human eyes could not and link between various forms of art, common themes. This wasn't an ask. So just think about the changes to the outcome. And that's what's going to happen.
Okay. Thanks, CP. You had a point?
No, I think from my perspective, the biggest challenge is not skill development of the employees. I think the bigger challenge is how leaders will orient themselves to the tectonic shifts that are happening in the market. And Phil, you started by reminding us an Apple, Mac, and Enterprise. I mean, how many of us remember when we switched, the tectonic shift was as much when from the rotary phones, we switched to the mobile phones. I mean, it just happened. I mean, we didn't have to go through. So my personal assumption is that for employees or future employees, because these technologies, the new technologies are so adaptive that they will learn on their own. It's the same way a child of a 1 year, was never taught how to use a smartphone. I mean, he just learned it. I think the biggest challenge is, will the leadership be able to adopt, and will they be able to give the directions to the new world? I mean, will a technology company realize that the domain knowledge will become a lot more important? Will a technology company realize that we need to work more on the use cases now instead of just saying that I am a tech shop? So I think that's where some of us as leaders will have to question ourselves.
Completely, yeah. I mean, it depends. I mean, the BlackBerry completely transformed. Remember that came into enterprise, and every leader had a BlackBerry. It was your privilege, and you spent all day on the thing and playing that brick breaker game. But that completely transformed how we interacted with each other. But then better tech came along after that. This feels very different because the tech's coming along, and it's figuring out how to change your mindset and use this more effectively. And then you start to try it out. I mean, I've seen people using these language voice apps with chat already, and I don't even think we're going to be using keyboards much in 2 or 3 years' time. I think we're going to be talking to our machines, and we're using a lot more voice and things. Okay, so let's, in the interest of time, I want to have a quick conversation about partnerships, because there's a big services relationship spin on today's conversation. And maybe Tony, you want to start us off saying, can we get past these old world effort partnerships and move to something?
Are you saying that we're going to change that one slide that says we all want to buy it on performance, but we still buy it on FTE?
Yeah, everyone says they want performance, but then they buy FTE.
Yeah.
Is that procurement's fault, or is it?
I don't know whose fault. I think it is that the economic value that's being presented right here and the value that's being asked for by the suppliers in the space the suppliers seem to be still asking for outsized amounts as compared to what the buyers want to do. There's so many innovative solutions that are available out there in the fintech and insurtech areas that I just don't necessarily need to get it from a big name company any longer. There's lots of choices for us as buyers to get it from different places where I don't need to give up, millions of dollars in a transaction. I know that, Accenture looks like the big, the $100 million diamond clients and shooting elephants out there, but there's a lot of solutions out there that these don't require big implementations nowadays to get good results. So I do think that's probably the challenge. Will we ever get down there? I think it's whether the companies themselves want to, how they want to actually how they see their internal incentives aligned to making these decisions that they're buying. If my goal is to take out cost, I'm going to take out cost. If my goal is to make revenue, I'm going to combine and partner for revenue. It just is those types of definitions.
This has been discussed for probably again a decade, right? I think shifting from effort-based to performance-based. And it has been a challenge, whether it's a procurement organization, different this thing, you try to get into the lowest cost rate. I do think that in the last few years, I think, in fact, since COVID, there is a greater adoption of what in Accenture we are now calling it total enterprise reinvention. And we are seeing a massive uptake where people have kind of it's not like finance or IT or this thing. They are trying to take the full, what I call as creating functionless organizations. So I think that I see a trickle around, trying to move towards the performance measures. The adoption of people say that we are doing all these big changes. We did a research. 86% of the companies said that they are doing big transformations in their organizations. 86%. We dug into it. Only 6% actually were doing what we call as total enterprise reinvention, touching every part of the organization. Siloed finance, HR, some IT, some this thing, but nobody is taking it holistically. And that is why I think that once you start adopting this curve will change towards more performance oriented.
Yeah.
Also, the definition of value. So, is the value cost? Is the value revenue? Is the value new customer acquisition? We've got now contracts where the value is the full end to end. Make sure that the product is sitting on the retailer's shelf. on time, in full. And if it is not, we don't care which function it comes from, you run it, you are accountable. So one is what's the definition of value? Two, it's the level of maturity of the buyer. Is it a functional buyer? Is it an enterprise buyer? And what are you looking for?
Yeah, exactly. It's like having a salesperson and incentivizing them on a personal target versus the whole company target. Getting them thinking much bigger and broader. How do I wake up in the morning and think about how can I help my company? Well, in the interest of time,
just Phil, one comment. I would say, because technology is now the same as business, this becomes harder and harder. You know, if it's about my finance department, I have 100 people, want to do it with 50, that's easy. But technology in business, growing the business, new services, you need to be agile. I mean, it's hard to pull this off between two companies.
it is. It depends on. So I'm going to sign up with Randstad, and I want to make sure I have a great influx of talent to my company. You're going to think about the quality of talent.
Sure.
If I sign up with Weber PR, I'm going to think about, am I getting quoted in the right publication, the Wall Street Journal, this sort of stuff. It's very simple. You're looking at outcomes. Then I'm signing up with whatever to get IT support. Aren't you thinking about the great IT support you're getting, or are you thinking about how much am I paying for this? I mean, it's as simple as that, right? So, okay. So let's get on to the final question, which I really want to talk about here. If there's one wish you can make to change this industry for the better, just one wish, what would it be? Maybe from everything you've thought about today as well. So maybe we'll start at the end with Tony and move in with Tony.
I was going to start with no PowerPoint, but
That's a good one.
yeah, I wish it wasn't a PowerPoint. I do have to think that there's one thing I could change in the industry today. It would be, I wish that the sales hype would go away. You know, hearing all this, it can do 99%, 100%. We need to be very practical. And so I wish that the hype would die down a little bit and we could be very practical about what the real effectiveness is today and how we as buyers can adopt it and learn how to use it over the next few years and start getting better at it.
So Phil, you talked about generative enterprise. I'm going to call it generative ecosystem, because there is no single enterprise which is going to be fully capable of delivering everything that is needed. But if you get a generative ecosystem, you will automatically look at outcomes.
There you go. Did you get that, Saurabh? I could say he's pricked up there.
I think complexity. I'd love to see complexity go down and value go up across the board. And that is across everything we do in our ecosystem. Because I think it would just make us better as humans, make the world a better place. So love to see complexity reduce.
Manish?
I think I would certainly want enterprises to look beyond the siloed function and doing some incremental stuff. And hopefully they can adopt, the total enterprise reinvention, what I will say embracing total enterprise reinvention.
I like that. Sandra, one wish.
No, coming at it from a talent point of view, I would say make the industry a truly equitable place to be for everybody, where everybody, all people from all walks of life, no matter their background, can thrive and add value to the clients they're serving.
I'd say embrace the digital workforce. Put them for commoditized part of your stack. Differentiation will percolate up to the edge where you want to focus your human workforce, which is better at that edge and gives you a competitive differentiation.
From my point of view, in telecom world, we call the last mile problem, which effectively means are the benefits of the new technology or the new businesses reaching the last person on the earth? Now, that's really what I would like to wish. That means make it all inclusive.
Yep. Make it all inclusive. I think that's fantastic. Make it equitable. Focus humans on the edges and get out of the silos. Make it more simple. think about a generative ecosystem and think about value, think about less complexity. So thank you very much, everybody. It's been a fantastic conversation. I hope this is the start of a brilliant 2 days.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you.
Good to see you.
See you.